In the entire firmament of the human intellect, there are few stars that shine more brightly than that of His Royal Highness Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex. So the people of the world greeted with rapturous joy yesterday's news that Prince Harry, or Harry Windsor Markle, as he prefers to be known around Los Angeles, wants to save us all from the epidemic, the scourge, the human tragedy of social media misinformation. Misinformation in this case meaning any sort of opinion or sentiment that Harry Windsor Markle and his woke Hollywood plutocrat friends happen to find objectionable. And with that goal in mind, His Royal Highness has unveiled his own 15-point action plan for stamping out unapproved thoughts and speech on the interwebs, a plan that he hopes, and I quote, leaders will consider adopting across the public, private, and non-profit sectors. For the better part of a year, continued the prince, we at the Aspen Commission have met regularly to debate, discuss, and draft solutions to the mis- and disinformation crisis, which is a global humanitarian issue. And boy, wouldn't you love to read the minutes from one of those meetings? Meetings in which Harry Windsor Markle and other similarly rich, useless, vapid people toss around their best ideas for forcing people on Twitter to only traffic in ideas of which they approve. All right, continuing the quote. I hope to see the substantive and practical recommendations of our commission taken up by the tech industry, the media industry, by policymakers and leaders. This affects not some of us, but all of us. Now, imagine for a moment being so rich that the idea of struggle or privation is completely foreign to your own life experience. Imagine that you have no professional duties or responsibilities of which to speak since you decided to quit them all and move to Hollywood because your wife said you had to. Imagine that you had unlimited time and resources with which to make the world a better place and help those less fortunate than yourself. How do you suppose that you would spend that time? If your answer is, well, I'd spend that time making documentaries about myself and promoting the wholesale eradication of free speech on the internet, then your name might be Harry Windsor Markle. And hey, bash the guy all you want, but at least his goals are modest and altruistic ones, untainted by any deranged lack of circumspection or any sense of unwarranted self-importance. All His Royal Highness wants is to be able to surf Twitter all day and never encounter any ideas of which he disapproves, or which might cause unwanted mental exertion. And speaking of Twitter, Prince Harry dropped another bombshell about a week and a half ago when he disclosed, in total seriousness with an absolutely straight face, that he, Harry Windsor Markle, private investigator, international man of mystery, had advanced knowledge of the January 6th insurrection. Harry is quite the online sleuth, you see, and he was working deep undercover, impersonating a militia guy from Arkansas named Jethro, ingratiating himself on QAnon Twitter, infiltrating their operation, much like Johnny Depp in Donnie Brasco. And he starts working his way up the ranks because his cover is so good, none of these QAnon insurrectionist, domestic terrorist, white supremacist, anti-vaxxers suspect for a moment that their buddy Jethro from Arkansas is really a British prince working under ultra-deep cover trying to bring down the whole rotten edifice of their organization. Eventually, he earns enough trust that they let him DM with the big boss, who informs him that on January 6th we are going to march into the Capitol and overturn the election by farting on Nancy Pelosi's desk. And Chewbacca Man, he's going to be the new dictator for life. So Harry says, crikey, this is bollocks, mate. I need to warn Twitter. Which is where the investigation sort of goes sideways. I mean, when the story you're telling culminates with, okay, I gained foreknowledge of a plot to overthrow the U.S. government, and I immediately warned Jack Dorsey. Not like law enforcement, but Jack Rasputin, the volleyball whisperer, was a real bastard about it, apparently. Didn't even write back to Harry's email, which was also, it has to be said, total bollocks, mate. Now, James Eagle, be a good chap and hit the music if you would. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where Bob is only your uncle until he becomes your aunt. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. The jury is still deliberating in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial for some reason, because if there's a record for the number of times a case should have been declared a mistrial with prejudice but was not, this case has to have broken it by now. The latest blunder by the Galaxy Brain prosecution team, and I hesitate to even call it a blunder, or to call any of these things blunders, really, because Hanlon's razor notwithstanding, some of the prosecutorial misconduct has been so brazen that it's difficult to ascribe incompetence to what looks like an attempt at forcing a mistrial because you've decided that a mistrial saves you more face personally and professionally than a clean acquittal does. But their latest, let's call it a legal faux pas. That's a morally ambiguous term, right? It came to light today when the jury requested to view in the course of its deliberations. The prosecutors had played a piece of video during their closing arguments in the presence of the jury that had never been entered into evidence and whose existence was heretofore unknown to the defense. The piece of video in question was of higher resolution than the version of the same footage that had been shared with the defense during discovery, and the defense team is not without fault here, because when a noticeably different version of the video was played during the closing arguments, they should have been on their feet immediately, objecting in the most strenuous possible terms, demanding a mistrial with prejudice for the fourth or fifth time. It was actually the jury that noticed the difference, so when they were deliberating and wanted to view the footage they had seen in the closing argument, the only version in the proverbial evidence locker was the lower resolution version that had been entered into evidence and shown earlier on in the trial. So the jurors said, no, we want to see the better version, the higher resolution one, the one that Binger played during his closing argument. And then it dawns on everybody, well, we don't actually have that one, because it was never entered into evidence. Now, the prosecutors, they did their best to feign ignorance and or incompetence. They blamed the whole thing on, well, we transferred it from a phone to a laptop, and so some weird computery stuff probably happened, and the file got compressed and the resolution reduced, so whoopsie, what do you do? And then Kyle's lawyer, his woman lawyer, I can't recall her name offhand, but this was where she had one of the best mic drop moments of the entire trial when, after listening to this long, rather painfully tortured attempt at an explanation, she retorted with a simple and elegant rhetorical question. Why, she said, if this was just an accident that happened while transferring a file, why does our version have a different file name and a date of creation that's 21 minutes after the other one? Now, people who are engaged in malfeasance often think they're so clever, and yet they so often manage to leave their asses hanging out in such creatively stupid ways. So Galaxy Brain DA number 1 and Galaxy Brain DA number 2, whose names are Binger and Kraus, by the way, in case you thought I was overstating things when I said literally every single person involved in any way with this case is of German ethnicity, and I think Judge Schroeder agrees with me on this, by the way. Now, you betcha he does. You're darn tootin'. Don't you get brazen with me there, fella. I'll be on you like ranch dressing on a nice block of cheddar. I haven't actually seen this many Germans since I vacationed in Buenos Aires in 1950. You know, some people are confused when they first visit Wisconsin. They think there's some sort of racial segregation going on because they always see 2 drinking fountains everywhere, but it's actually not like that at all. They have separate drinking fountains because one dispenses Pabst and the other dispenses ranch dressing. So do take your time to acclimate yourself to the local culture before you go jumping to any regrettable conclusions, okay? So I forgot where I was before that comic digression. Right, Galaxy Brain DA number 1 and Galaxy Brain DA number 2, who, again, these guys might actually be woke idiot buffoons and astoundingly shitty lawyers, or they might be just feigning incompetence out of desire for a mistrial. But if the latter is really the case, the gambit would seem to have failed since the case has been sent to the jury. And look, on balance, all things being equal, if you're in the middle of your closing argument and you're still trying to force a mistrial, then Wow, you are really impressively committed to that outcome. In which case, if nothing else, I salute Galaxy Brain 1 and Galaxy Brain 2 for the perseverance, nay, the tenacity of their self-serving corruption. Now, was I the only one getting a sort of 21st century Laurel and Hardy vibe from these two prosecutors? The skinny metrosexual straight man and the bumbling, morbidly obese sidekick? Each of them had quite the day yesterday. Binger, who's made quite a habit in this trial of flamboyantly displaying his complete lack of firearms knowledge, decided it would make a great rhetorical flourish in his closing argument if he pointed an AR-15 directly toward the jury box with his finger on the trigger. Now, if you're old enough to remember last Tuesday and you're watching a program like this one, you probably don't need me to tell you what the three most basic, most elemental rules of gun safety are. Number 1, never point a weapon at a person whom you don't intend to shoot. Number 2, treat every weapon as if it is loaded. And number 3, never place your finger on the trigger unless you plan to fire. And I think it's worth noting, though I don't think his defense team ever did, that even when he was frightened and haggard and running for his life, every photo, every scrap of footage from the night in question shows Kyle Rittenhouse displaying proper barrel discipline and proper trigger discipline. The only people who had Kyle's rifle pointed at them that night were the 3 people whom he shot in self-defense because they were attempting to cause him grave bodily injury and or death. But don't try telling that to Assistant DA Fatty McTubagoo, a man who may actually be wider than he is tall, which I don't think we've seen since middle period Jerry Nadler, a man who last saw his own penis without the aid of a mirror in August of 1998, a man who stands as a living, barely breathing testament to the fact that Wisconsin really does have drinking fountains that dispense Pabst and ranch dressing. A man for whom, sorry, the elevator's busted, you'll have to take the stairs, is tantamount to a death sentence. Because Fatty says Kyle Rittenhouse is a pathetic little pussy turd boy. Fatty says a real man would have punched his way out of the situation. Fatty actually referred to the confrontation between Rittenhouse and Rosenbaum, the pederast serial rapist who'd been released from the psycho pen less than 12 hours previous, as a bar fight. Now, I myself have never been in a bar fight. Back when I used to go to bars, I did see fights occasionally, including the first time I ever went to a bar on my 21st birthday. I'm thinking, wow, so this is what it's like when you go to bars, huh? Each time you're either in a fight or you break up a fight. It's okay. Adulthood's going to be fun. But Fatty McTubagoo, he's trying to strike a casual tone like, hey, look, this is just a little scuffle, a fist fight. A scuffle like many of us may have been in before. He's saying this, and I'm trying to imagine how long this guy, all 5'6", 395 pounds of him, would last in any sort of physical trial, bar fights included, without dropping stone dead from a massive coronary. Doctor, we're going to need to do a transfusion over here. What's the blood type? Ranch! I want 3 units of Hidden Valley. Stat! But look, I don't want to make light of the fact that Mr. McTubagoo raises a valid and salient point. After all, who among us hasn't had an unfortunate Friday night when an escaped mental patient serial pederast child rapist didn't promise to murder us and then do his best to follow up on the threat? Who among us hasn't been bashed in the head with a skateboard while being punched and kicked by a couple of other people while a crowd gathers yelling for us to be killed? According to Mr. Binger, and he actually said this, there is no possible scenario wherein a person with a gun has a right of self-defense against a person without a gun. And just take a good long moment to ponder the astounding, damn near epoch-shattering stupidity of that statement. So according to Mr. Binger, if you're a woman and you have a lawful concealed carry permit and you're walking home and a guy tries to rape you, you have no right to shoot that attempted rapist in self-defense, for you have forfeited the right to self-defense by carrying that gun in the first place. If your rapist also has a gun, then presumably Mr. Binger will then allow you to discharge your weapon in your own self-defense, since there's now a bit of parity, and the rapist at least has a fighting chance. But if the rapist has no gun, say he only wants to rape you at knife point, well, in Binger world, you're left with 2 options. Either pistol whip the guy with the gun you're not allowed to fire, or just lay back and enjoy your sexual assault. And welcome to the brave new world of woke leftist morality. So Mr. Binger and Mr. Fatty McTubagoo, they were both hammering away at this idea that Kyle should have been a man and punched his way out of that trouble. Fatty actually called him cowardly for not having done so. And hey, I guess by that logic, that's a great way of doing an end run around the Second Amendment without having to go to the trouble of repealing it. Okay, you can bear arms, you can have a gun for personal protection. You just can't ever fire it at somebody who doesn't have a gun, not ever, not under any circumstances. So maybe the best solution, if we want to live in Binger world, is for gun owners to walk around at all times with a set of dueling pistols. So if a criminal attacks you, say a serial pederast, child rapist, mental patient, you can calmly de-escalate the situation by saying, "Good sir, I cannot help but notice that while I myself am armed, you do not enjoy the same luxury. So in the interest of chivalry and good sport, please accept one of these fine dueling pistols that we might settle our differences as gentlemen with our honor intact. Would you care to assist me in finding a proper dueling ground in the nearby area? And who shall be serving as your second? Is there another serial child rapist, mental patient friend of yours who can be here on short notice?" But let's not make any mistake here. The people who have said this trial is a hell of a lot bigger than Kyle Rittenhouse because the right to self-defense of every single American is on trial, both the ones who are currently living as well as those not yet born, those people are absolutely correct in their assessment of the gravity of this case. And that's a totally separate issue from the fact that this murder trial should never be happening, because nobody in Kenosha should have been shot to death last August, because there should have been no riots in Kenosha last August, because nothing happened in Kenosha that warranted a spasmodic mass orgy of looting and arson and other assorted violent criminal depredations. If we had a functioning news media, we wouldn't be here. But we don't have a functioning news media. We have an entire industry that has reduced itself to being the Heath Ledger version of the Joker. A bunch of people who just want to watch the world burn. And when you ask them why, they can't even tell you why. There's a crowd of BLM radical protesters holding vigil in front of the courthouse in Kenosha as we speak. Among them is the uncle of Jacob Blake. They are getting lavish amounts of media attention, as you can well imagine, but in all the interviews being done, do we ever hear the most obvious question? Do we ever hear any mainstream fake news performance artist summoning the courage to ask, literally everybody in this case is as white as the pure driven snow and has a suspiciously German surname, so do you want to explain why it is that Black Lives Matter is openly threatening to burn down Kenosha again if a German guy is acquitted of murdering some other German guys? But we're not allowed to ask those questions because German lives matter. In the crazed upside-down netherworld of cable news commentary, if you've been watching CNN or MSNBC, you've heard the pederast serial child rapist mental patient Joseph Rosenbaum described as a hero. No qualifiers, no caveats, a straight-up hero. Binger used the same word in his closing argument. This was a crowd of heroes, he said. And what makes Rosenbaum a hero? Well, we went over this in last Thursday's video. Rosenbaum is a hero. His actions are morally above reproach because he was participating in a media-approved, establishment-approved riot. Therefore, he was one of the good guys, an ally, a fellow traveler of the BLM crowd whose members now congregate outside the courthouse displaying signs honoring his memory. According to the people who fancy themselves your moral superiors, your intellectual overlords, and your rightful rulers, the absolute worst people in the world, people like Joseph Rosenbaum, are actually the best people in the world. Where you see a serial arsonist and an attempted murderer who enjoys raping little boys and whose life ended in a way that was pretty richly deserved, the woke left, on the other hand, the people who think they have the right to tell you what you're allowed to think, they see a hero and a martyr. And why is such a man regarded as a hero and a martyr? Well, duh, because he voted for the right candidate. Obviously, you silly Puritans on the right get so worked up over a bit of good-natured child rape. Loosen up once in a while, why don't you? And that is it for me. I will see you Friday, by which time hopefully we will have a verdict, and possibly some riots to talk about, depending on which way the verdict goes. But until then, please do have a pleasant tomorrow. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.